Streaming. Hold on 2 secs. I think we're streaming. Nikita, we're
Hey there.
streaming.
This
Hey,
is the first time I've ever done this.
first time you've ever done LinkedIn Live?
Yes, first time.
It's only my second time, so I'm not gonna go all pro on you about it. I did it like one time last week. Um, I don't even know how it works. I don't even know if you're supposed to like share beforehand that you're going to be going live, but I just go live and see what happens. So the reason we're doing this today is because you just brought out the Architect's Word Shop,
Um,
which I'm sure everybody on LinkedIn has seen at this point.
we hope so.
But anyway, tell me about what it is and a little bit about why you went from, actually give a little bit of your background in terms of what you do day to day for like architects and designers. And then we'll talk a little bit about the workshop stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a copywriter and marketing strategist for architects, and that's not to be confused with copyright law or design journalism, because I know a lot of architects kind of ask me for lawyer legal advice sometimes. So a copywriter, yeah, is obviously different. We're writing to sell and to get your ideal clients to take action in a
Yeah.
nutshell, and kind of underpinned in psychology and marketing. So that's what I do. And why architects? Well, I've worked in architecture publishing and I worked in-house as, in architecture comms, and I just felt that I could be helping more architects. So I kind of started off my own business. And I guess it's kind of a segue into how I started the shop, but I've been dealing with a lot more like mid-sized, larger firms, helping them with their brand strategy and writing websites and that. And I kind of felt that a lot of these
Yeah.
smaller guys, the solo kind of firms
Yeah.
and one-man bands kind of contacting me saying, I've got, $300. Can I have an architect, like a
Mm,
website copy redone? And
yeah.
we
Just
can't
doesn't work.
on that
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Takes us time and research and that. So yeah, that's kind of how this idea was born. I thought what I'll do is create exactly the process I use, chuck in heaps of examples, and rather than like a done for you kind of fill in the blank template,
Yeah.
um, I'm creating toolkits. So around about pages, website bios, press releases, so everything architects need, but just in a toolkit form. So it kind of steps them through, like almost like a building scaffolding, like kind of setting them up. And then I take away the scaffolding, and what they're left with at the end of working through these toolkits is hopefully a solid piece of writing.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the ones that are up on the site now are so you've got the about page master plan. So obviously about pages.
yes.
You've also got a website biography builder.
Yes.
Before I look at the other two, what's the difference between website biography and about page?
Sure. So your about page is more about your practice.
Yep.
And yeah, I guess your design philosophy, your style, like again, obviously always writing for the ideal client,
Yep.
whereas your bio is more like personal profiles. And
Yep.
these do sometimes get confused. So it's a great question that you've raised. But yeah, the bio is about you, and it's not so much about your education and what you've done, but it's more, I think it's really important to, instead of talking about what you have done in terms of academic achievements, it's more about you as a person. So get people to trust you and build that familiarity before
Yeah. That's interesting because that seems like one of well, I mean, every single one of these, like the biography, the about page, the project description, and the press release. Probably with the exception of the press release, I'd say that the first three, um, people get so stuck because you just have that awkward, like, naturally I'd write about myself, but it's kind of like writing your own CV or your own cover letter, like in the third person, like Dave did this and Dave did that. It's uncomfortable, and so you're trying to break it down and make it a little bit easier for them to not just sort of state the facts of like I worked at this firm and then I did this degree, but you're giving them advice on maybe how to get more of their personality into that, or is that kind of what the sort of stuff that it's covering?
Exactly. So, a lot of marketing people say that you need to know, like, and trust. And I think a big part of the one that's missing with architects, and I don't mean this in an offensive way, but is that likability factor. Like, no one wants to work with a jerk, right? Like, you want to be liked.
Yeah.
And the reality is, in these days, people are going online and Googling you before they might even meet you in person. So
Yeah.
you need to be likable from the get-go. And
Yeah.
so that bio builder, I'm trying to kind of, get architects to think creatively. And I know architects are creative, obviously, because of what they do, but it's more like it doesn't have to even be just a paragraph. Like there's lots of firms doing Q&As, or I've seen one firm that I include in the toolkit that does like flat lays of their desk and has like personal items, and then it talks about each item. It's getting to know people on a different level. So the toolkit's filled with just different creative examples of how you can present your bio as well. It doesn't just have to be like, this is me, here's my profile pic, dressed in black.
Yeah. So it's sort of like there's some more out of the box ways of doing it. Where you maybe don't even have to, it's not really about what you're saying as much as how you're saying it, right? In terms of, like it could just be things laid out on people's desk, and that might tell you more about them than what you would have gotten from just, a paragraph out of their Wikipedia page kind of vibe. Okay, cool. That's really, really interesting. So, in terms of, I know you haven't sent me any free samples. I got no samples, so I have no.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll send it to you.
No, you can't, because I'm just gonna secretly pass them on to clients. So we can't do free samples. But in terms of like the structure of like what's inside, say like you mentioned that the biography one has some like examples. What's like the structure inside? Because it's not just like following the paint by numbers kind of approach, which I understand why you did that as well, because when you've got one firm A, B, C, and D all looking at the same thing, they don't all need the exact same framework. They have to come up with their own ideas, right? So you're putting in a structure inside the word shop where it's like, here are sort of like a range of options or different things you could think about. Is that like how you've approached most of them?
Yeah, so it's like the toolkits are all kind of broken up into different sections. So for example, with the bio, like it's the bio builder, so it takes you through all the different steps. So like how you open it, there's whole different ways to open your bio. You don't have to just say, my name is Dave Sharp, I've done this. So I give you creative ways to open it, and then it's how, like, what you should be including in each paragraph and how to break it down. And then it kind of talks about the design, the words, and the image. So they're the kind of things. So image, talking about your profile pics. So I give a whole lot of options and ideas of how to actually take creative profile pics that align with your brand. So it doesn't just have to be black turtleneck looking pensively into the distance. You can do some really cool stuff. So, I guess the most valuable part, and I guess not the most, but a big part of the toolkits are this time I've spent really scouring the internet to find some good ideas, not for you to copy, but just as ideas for inspiration, to be like, well, come on, this kind of resonates with me, I can apply this. And things like, in terms of content on your bio, including testimonials, including, personal strengths, your ideas, like talk about your ideas rather than, just listing out where you graduated and your registration number, that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying don't have it in there, but it's building upon it. So by the end, every single person that goes through this, and I've tested it with over 25 different architects, the bio builder, they all came out at the end with different bio.
Cool.
It goes to show it's not
So when you're looking for examples that you like, are you, because like whenever I suggest something to an architect they haven't seen another architect do before, they start to get a little nervous, right? And there's always this question of, are there other architects doing this, right? But in the case of these examples, are you looking like outside of architecture as well, like to other different kinds of websites, or have you tried to keep it kind of like within the industry so it's a bit more, close to that leap isn't so far?
That's a great question, Dave, and one that I the whole time I was writing, I was like, I should be looking outside. And for me, I wanted to kind of give outside industry examples, but exactly as you said, I think architects do like to, it just makes it a bit more
like a bit more relatable, and you can sort of try it on for size a little bit easier and imagine, is that too far of a stretch? I think if you're showing them some like, tech startup in San Francisco and they're like a little architecture firm in Melbourne, it's going like, does that fit well with us?
Yeah. And I guess I tried to do a range of resi, commercial, big firms, small firms.
Yeah.
So it's not just like all these big firms with huge budgets, and some small guy being like, I can't afford to do that. Like, or whatever. So I think I've given a good range.
So let's talk about the project description one. so you've got the bundle that has all of them, but the project description package, like that's an interesting one, right? Because that must be really, really hard to give advice on project description stuff without, seeing their project. That must have been really challenging, that one, right?
Yeah, this is actually my favorite one. I think that I
Yeah.
feel like I nailed
You
this
feel like you
one.
made like there was real innovation took place when you finally cracked it. Like I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I what I did was I got the story arc that any type of story has, like the hook, and
Yeah.
then you like the climatic event and that. So I kind of tried to apply that, and I studied heaps different architecture website project descriptions, and again, I take you through the arc, and I've given layout options. Like I think I've got 5 different layout options. For example, some just have the image with the description below. Some weave it like a story, like almost like an editorial. So I've given ideas on layout as well as then ideas on content. So you don't always just have to write one big paragraph. You can divide up into
Hmm.
subheadings. And again, there's like heaps of examples in there. And they're all annotated to say why it's good and that. So
Mm. Wow. That sounds really like, oh, I want my free samples, Nikita.
I will. The project, and even I contacted architectural photographers, and
Yeah.
inside there is like questions and like ways to
Yeah.
how to brief the photographer, so you get the best out of it. Because I really am passionate about words and images working together, and I think sometimes you get all the images and then you're like, now what? Like, how do I write this thing? Because
Yeah.
they don't write anything; they just chuck up the images. And
Yeah, it's actually really interesting to get the thoughts of photographers as well and get their advice because sometimes they're the best people to, sometimes they're the best people to give you that sort of third party outsider perspective on their interpretation of the project. Like if you're just an architect, you're there every day, you've been looking at the project, it's become like mush to you now at this point, like what you were trying to originally do at the beginning, right? By the time you're finally at the end, you've finally got your photos, it's finally ready to go on the website. You're just like, it's got stairs, there's some handrails. Like at that point, you've kind of just, you're over it.
yeah,
Um, and that, maybe that photographer might be the only real person who steps in apart from you and the client and spends time thinking about that building before it's like out there in the world. So
yeah.
do you think that how do you deal with photography in the project description part of it? Is there any advice on like kind of using photography, integrating it into the writing side of things, or are they two sort of separate things? Or how do you kind of treat them or recommend architects think about like using their photography in their project descriptions and their project pages?
Exactly. And so I do, and that was, I guess, that where that story arc comes in. I kind of say the whole premise of writing your project description is to tell a story,
Yeah.
and more from the perspective, so that because it's on your website. This is
Yeah.
for websites. This isn't project descriptions for case studies or anything. This is
Yeah.
primarily all my toolkits that help you to get more clients. So this is telling your project using the images to back up the words and vice versa, to pretty much say, like, when your ideal client comes on your website, they're like, oh, cool, I can imagine working with these guys. And,
Hmm.
so for example, I give recommendations of having people in some of the shots, not just your beautiful space,
Hmm.
but bringing that space to life, having captions.
Hmm.
Um, I give ideas on how to integrate video as well, not just images, but moving picture.
Yeah.
Um, and again, like subheadings and yeah, so
Yeah.
it's working together.
That's actually a really interesting reminder of the idea of what the purpose of it is in the first place, which is like trying to get you more clients. Like that's kind of like taken for granted, particularly because a lot of the time we repurpose the copy from like awards entries or something. It's not where it's written to impress in a way, but not in the way that you're like tying it into whatever your strategy is for getting clients or whatever you are trying to tell people about your practice or how you're meant to make your practice appealing to your ideal client. So that's really cool that you're thinking about it and going like, all right, before we even worry about the project itself, like
Yeah.
how are we using this project to like actually win work in terms of what should we say, what story should we tell? And do you think that it's kind of like in terms of like what the norm is out there and then what you're suggesting, do you think you're maybe pushing people to talk more about like the client of the project or how it's lived in, or is it like some of the challenges of the brief? Like, what are some of the areas that you focus more on than like you see on most architects' websites?
Definitely, and that's a really good point. So I, in the toolkit, I do recommend that on every project description, somehow, some way, you get a client testimonial. So at the
Yeah,
end of the project, when someone's lived in it, you know, have it directly from
yeah,
their mouth, because that's the best social proof.
yeah.
So yeah, definitely integrate their story as well. So as you said, like the brief, like what, as architects, you're not just selling buildings. As we all know, you're selling so
Mm,
much more than that. So talk about, what's the end result? Did they get more space so that they can have their grandchildren over? Or so that kind of also
mm,
then helps like-minded clients, if they've got a similar project, they're thinking, oh, well, that's exactly what I need and
yeah,
want. So, and then they find that connection. And
yeah,
again, it's all just about building trust. I mean, another thing is you don't need to write a lot. Like, I'm not suggesting in this toolkit that you need to write an essay. It's just
yeah.
more write the right words. I mean, don't use too much on your website architectural terminology unless it's really necessary, because again, the people you're trying to attract are not other architects. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So if a firm picked up this blueprint, would you would you suggest that they use it for future projects, or would it be worthwhile to kind of go through whatever their entire portfolio is on their website and maybe take a second look at their existing projects as well?
Yeah, I think consistency is key. And I've
Yeah.
seen that on so many, I don't know, you probably have come across it as well. Like you can tell some, the assistant or something has gone in, written a few, then they've obviously like left the company and someone else has come in,
Yeah.
and some don't have any descriptions at all. And you're like, okay,
Oh
maybe.
yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think consistency and even like structure, and for example, just have like brief and then a sentence about the brief and then the challenges,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and like
Like
simple as that. But
yeah, and that makes it easier to write as well. Like
exactly.
yeah, because if you just think of it as like I have to do I feel I need to do 800 words of something, and then you sit down and you just write until you hit 800 words, and then you're like, that's my project description. Where it's like, it's much better to think about actually planning out a structure. And I'd say like 80-90% of architects' websites I go on don't have any kind of structure going on their project pages. It's just like the statement, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, do you a lot of the time when you've got like project descriptions, they become the thing that like Arc Daily just like publishes, or all the online platforms, they'll just go, yep, cheers for that, and then put it in the article, and then that's it. Like, what would your suggestion be in terms of if a firm, so I get the sense that you always think quite clearly about like each place this text is going to be has its own kind of unique and important purpose. Like
Yeah.
on the website, the job is to like convert these clients that are on the site. What if a practice was taking, they've been contacted by a journalist and said, we want to publish your project in a few days time, could you send us the project description? Would you suggest that they maybe look at it again, or make a different version of it, or would you think that generally, like with the advice, if they were following the blueprint, that it would probably work the same for the media as well as on their website? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my thoughts, I think, yeah, it would. Essentially, a project description is a project description. But in saying that, I'm very, like, when you're going after a certain publication in the media, for example, if it's Arch Daily, you need
Yeah,
to have some sort of understanding on who their audience is. So,
yeah,
for example, if their audience, like, and the best way to do that is just to read like six previous
yeah,
articles that kind of align. And, if they're, you kind of can tell by downloading their media kit or whatever who their audience is, and you think, okay, they're going to be more interested in the actual design features, like the actual materials specified in that. Then I would
yeah,
just use that same structure, just buffer it out a little bit more, and put in more of the details. But again, it's always just going back to like who the audience is,
yeah.
and getting as much information. The best way is, yeah, just to read past articles.
Mm.
But yeah, a lot of that cut and copying goes on in our industry, which
Oh, like a ton. Yeah. So like,
repurposing is not cool. Well, I don't know.
yeah. Well, I mean, at least that means that if it makes the investment of sitting down and like really thinking about a good project description, it makes it a little bit more worthwhile, because like an architect might be working on their website and they're working on doing some outreach to some publications, and maybe I don't know, maybe they could reuse some of that content on Instagram. I don't know, like I'm not necessarily saying that, but if they make their project description like well structured, so they know which parts are maybe relevant to different kinds of audiences or have different uses, that could be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the press release manual, okay, so this is an interesting one because I don't really come across press releases all that much from small firms. It's more of a big firm thing. And, but would you argue that like press releases is still a really good idea for small firms as well?
Definitely. And that's why I've kind of made, because that was kind of another one. I was like, is this going to be of value? And I think, if anything, for these smaller guys, like everyone thinks it's just reserved for the bigger guys, but
Yeah.
it is actually easier than you think to get your press release out there into the media. And that's why in that toolkit, I literally include the template that I use to pitch my own services to the media. So it's like
Yeah.
you can just cut and copy that and chuck it into an email and send it off.
Yeah.
Just customize it a little bit. But yeah, it's kind of how to write a press release that editors are going to read. And because I've had that experience working in an editorial department in an architecture,
Yeah.
I use all the secret hints and how to package it up, how to write the email, like what they're looking for, ones that are just going to go straight into the trash, like,
Yeah.
and how to follow up and to keep on it is like that as well. And it's not just the toolkit isn't just for project press releases. I think in
Yeah.
the first page, I kind of said, well, what are you sending this for? Is it that you're sending it to like a publication because you want to improve your reputation within the industry? Do you want clients? Because then you really shouldn't be going to an architecture magazine because you're not going to get that many clients from there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of see through all
Oh, shots fired at the architecture magazines.
that. No, didn't mean like that. That's
Can we cut that bit out? No, but that's interesting. So it's thinking more broadly about your target audience, because big firms do, right? Like they don't just send their stuff to Architecture AU day in day out. They think about a really broad range of publications like outside of the architectural media. Like that's almost a big part of the reason. Would you, if you had a few different audiences, like media places that you'd selected, so you had some architecture stuff, and then hey, maybe let's say Bloomberg and the AFR are in there, and then we've got these like different sets of audiences. Would you write different press releases for those different kind of genres, or would you design a press release that's kind of working with all the different kinds of groups?
I mean, in an ideal world, like you'd want to
Yeah.
write a specific one.
If you had a PR team, you would do different ones. But if you're on your own as an architect, yep, okay.
Yeah, I think you just got to write one. But I think the key, and this is the biggest thing that I take, is like number one, the research. Like it's not just about banging out a few words and just sending it off like to this mass list, like BCCing everyone. Like it's really about relationship building. So getting to know editors, because at the end of the day, they need stories too. And the Bowerbird guys are the best at this. Like they're connecting. So it's just about building your relationship with the editors, and then for them to trust you as a good source of news. And I think also being real with yourself, like, really is this project going to, if you don't have the good images, if it's not, there's no story behind it, is it news? Like,
yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Is it news? Like, how is it? It can be pretty tough. I mean, it can be pretty tough to know whether your work is like publishable. I know I know to an outsider, it can be like pretty obvious whether a firm's work is publishable or not, or a specific project is. But how would you deal with that idea of wondering, like, is this good enough? Whether it was something you've made, or just so that you could maybe think a little bit about what sort of thoughts an architect might have, or what sort of way of calculating whether or not it would be worth their time to put a lot of eggs into this new project basket without it just being like a gamble. Is there anything that like you think is just fundamentally it has to be at some sort of mark for it to be worth putting that time into it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you can make a story and a piece out of anything, and and that's the thing. Like, it has to be really visually. I think in this day and age, if it doesn't have beautiful images, and I think
Yeah.
if you've invested in proper photography,
Yeah,
you're
you
going
can see what you've spent and work out whether or not the images are beautiful,
exactly.
right?
And so I think that's one way is to if like you're and then creating that story, that's where this toolkit comes in. That's where a copywriter or whatever, like that's it's I mean, there is a story behind everything. It's just finding the right angle and making sure that that angle fits with the publication that you want. But also just, I think, asking around. Like, you and I, we work on different businesses, but we're colleagues.
Yeah.
We pass ideas
Yeah.
back and forward. So I'm sure there's like architects have their own networks just to kind of like, hey, mate, like, what do you think of this? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Collecting anonymous feedback from their
Putting
peers.
that out.
Yeah, so I just want to also ask about a point that you mentioned where it's like not just new projects. So, like at the start of talking about press releases, I was like, well, most architects I know don't send press releases like full stop, but they should. But you would usually only associate that with a new project because for smaller and medium-sized firms, they tend to see that as like the major milestone. But obviously, like if you look at what large firms send press releases about, sometimes it's like appointed a new director, participated in something, we've adopted a new software. Like there's always this like,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's going too far with what press releases can be about, but do you like, can you think of any other things that a small practice might think about approaching the media about?
Yeah, I mean, like I've written a lot of some of those those ideas are in the toolkit, but also
Yeah.
things like new ideas that you're exploring. Like I know that doesn't seem like a big piece of news, but if you're an expert in one field,
Yeah.
for sustainability or something, and you've just released a blog on your website where you're just going to invest a lot of your IP and you're going
Mm.
to be writing continually, like that in itself is a piece of news because at the end of the day, what is news? It's something that's new and it's going to
Yeah.
add value
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the audience. So yeah, I think philosophies, ideas, if you've got a different take on something than a lot of other people have, or if you're starting something, when we saw beginning of this year with all the bushfires, there are a lot of architecture firms taking a stance on
Yeah.
climate change, and they've got their own initiatives, whether it's like starting from the firm or you could be participating in a. So I think, yeah, it's just standing for something. That's
Yeah.
another. It doesn't have to be about or your firm standing for something.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Because we see examples of that stuff appearing in the mainstream media all the time, but like people don't usually get proactive about promoting that stuff that they're doing. They just put on their Instagram account, but then it's only if we're lucky, somehow the media finds out about it in certain cases, and then these architects do get a lot of a lot of profile on what they're doing. Like even sometimes examples of like speculative projects. I mean, you mentioned a blog post, which is a really good idea, and I think if they've done research, but research also in the form of design research, like particularly where I've seen firms where they've maybe come up with just a really simple concept for some new, multifamily housing or something like that, where they haven't done it for a client, but they've sort of put the idea together and then they've contacted like a newspaper about it, and the newspaper have published it. And we're always like, that just got read by 2 million people. This is crazy. And, I think it's a really, really interesting observation that you're like, sometimes that stuff that you don't think is that interesting that you're doing is actually kind of interesting because you're an expert, you're a professional expert in a certain area. So that's really, really cool. So press releases and sending them. I actually really like the idea of the press release module, particularly when you're like, I've basically given you my like format on what I like
Yeah, I'll send it to
your
you.
script. Now I definitely want that free sample because I
Yeah,
just
I
want to
will give that
completely,
to you. It's all
yeah,
yours.
I want to make that I want to make that for sure. Okay, interesting. So in future, I mean, we haven't really spoken about the about page thing. Is there anything on the about page master plan that's like, what are your opinions on about pages in
Yeah.
general?
So my about page master plan, it's probably the lengthiest document out of all of them. I think it's
Yeah,
like 50 something pages. And the reason for that is it's much more than, at the end, it's much more than just an about page. What you get is I take you like step by step, um, in finding what makes your firm different. So I mean, a lot of architects say like we're all doing the same thing, but you're not. So I try and help you find that one thing that makes you stand out. And it isn't necessarily a typology, but it could be your design philosophy, the way you approach your projects, your customer service. Like there's all these different ways that you can actually stand out and become the expert in one thing. And that it just kind of takes you through that. It also takes you through finding your tone of voice. A lot of architects are like, well, we're not quirky and weird, like we don't know how to write, and so I kind of take them and say, you don't need to be that, but you need to have a bit of personality if you want to be remembered. So yeah, the about page one is just a lot more but it's more about finding the essence of your firm and what makes you really, communicating that clearly.
I mean, I've been doing what I've been doing for like 3 or 4 years, and I still like find it tough to figure out sometimes what a firm's like edge is, to use like some like finance jargon. Just like, what's their edge? I'm always like, what's their little thing that I haven't seen before or is different? And you have to just keep on like picking around and trying to find out, like, until they ultimately reveal, oh yeah, we do this and this. Doesn't everyone else do that? And we're like, no, not everyone else does that. That's your thing. But what are some of your strategies for, like, I don't know, figuring out what that point of difference is? Because there's so many different ways you can approach it, right?
Sure. So I mean, like in the toolkit, obviously I'm not there. So it's more just like a step by step I give them different like lenses, I guess, to view their practice. And I kind of say, for example, a lot of people in the architecture world shy away from this idea of a niche because they think, well, what happens if the market changes, or isn't that a bit risky? Like I want to be everything to everyone, but I kind of in the toolkit kind of say, well, look, this is why it will help your business from a profitability kind of standpoint to have expertise. You can charge more, etc. But I mean, when I work with clients one-on-one, then it's more of a discovery. As you said, you just keep digging, you keep asking questions, how they work, who they work with, etc., to find that thing. And there is, as you said, always something. There's always something.
Yeah, there's usually something.
Yeah.
You get worried if there isn't something, in a way, right? Because it's like, you set up a firm. You almost, like, you set up any business. In a big way, you're going to be thinking, I'm going to work for myself, or I'm going to design my own building, so I'm going to do something because I think I do it differently. Is, at the core of why a lot of people run their own business. It's like, I want to act in a certain way, I want to work with a certain type of client, or I want to design a certain type of building, and I can't do that working for somebody else. So I start my own practice, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years go by, and you kind of forget why you why you did that in the first place. And so I've noticed that a lot of the time it's usually like the last place you look. It's just, what were some of the things that were going through their head when they like started their firm can sometimes be, I don't know, can sometimes at least be informative for staying in that discussion. Because as you know, like doing something for a bunch of years, sometimes you do just kind of like go, wait, why did I start doing this?
Exactly. And that's actually like sometimes when I do strategy sessions with my clients, like they find the questions I ask them the most valuable. I'm sure you find the same. They've never asked themselves those questions. They're like, oh, so.
Yeah. I mean, people, I think, I even think that that's sometimes what prevents people from doing a lot of this marketing related stuff, is that sort of that passion for what they're doing can not die off, but it can kind of just lose its potency a little bit over time, and you get into a bit of a funk. And I think there's a lot of firms that kind of just like get stuck in a bit of a rut, and they're like, I'm not feeling that strongly about that self-confidence, that sense of like, our firm rocks, we're absolute rock stars. You tend to lose that a little bit after a while. And even sometimes the process of like asking those questions can help to bring some of that back. And then once that starts to come back, those ideas start to come out a little bit more for the marketing side of things, which is why our job is so cool, because we get to do that with people.
Well, different types of people too.
Different types of people at different kinds of stages. Some people, when they're just started their firm and they're like so full of energy and they got so many different ideas, but they have zero ability to focus. And then there's other people that have just like kind of, stagnated a little bit, and then they just need help kind of getting out of that, which is really, That's probably, it's weird when you work in like marketing and communication, but you do a lot of this almost like life coachy type stuff in a way, because like when people are running their own business and they're, particularly as they're a small company, how they're feeling has such a big impact on like what they do. You know,
Exactly.
people definitely need to be in the right state of mind. So like, you know, in terms of like the process of working through some of these blueprints or workshop things, um, you know, what sort of stage of time would you normally see somebody like working on these over the course of like weeks, or is it something that, does it just depend on like what the project is that they're trying to tackle, or like how do you see people kind of following it?
Yeah, so this is something that was in the back of my mind the whole way through writing these is, I mean, if there's anything you and I both heard is just architects are busy.
Yeah,
They're busy, like no time. This is like the last thing on their mind. Like, where are they going to find the time? And I mean, actually, given the current circumstances, maybe
plenty
they
of
have
time. Plenty of
a
time.
bit more time. But in my, the forward, like in my opening note, I do say like I've designed it so that you can either smash it out. I would say like in 4 or 5 hours. I don't want to put a time limit because everyone takes different times. But like in an afternoon, if you just want to sit there, turn off all distractions, you can. Or it can be something that a lot of architects work on the weekends. So it could be something that you could just do over the course of a few Sunday mornings over coffee. So it's just like it's not like you have to just really sit down and do it all in one go. Like it's up to you as to how you kind of digest the information and put it to use. But I mean, at the end, I guess there's two things. I want them to, I want people to realize how important these things are into helping you get better projects and get better clients. And then as well as kind of at the end of it, be left with something that they can use immediately and put up on the website. And yeah.
Yeah. And you've also put an option up on your workshop store for them to actually book a time to speak with you as well if they need help with that. So
Yeah, if that's just like an editing. I think what I found is I don't want people to be like, okay, well now what? Like, is this good enough? For people who don't
they
have that
want feedback on the stuff
exactly.
they've done.
So,
Yep.
yeah, and like I'm, also tossing up the idea of maybe like having another kind of a pre-session before they start writing and then an end one. I don't know, but I
Yeah.
know that it is hard. Like I find it hard sometimes. You end up with a piece of writing and you just think, well, now.
Yeah, it's so tough. And initially, like you talked about, one of the reasons you started was that your time is quite expensive,
Yeah.
and that the whole sort of purpose for creating some of these products was to be able to bring that information down to a more affordable budget range. So I understand how you've tried to make it as DIY as much as humanly possible, but you've still given that option there for people, which is good. I could see it being at the end for sure, because it's one thing to sit down and like write the stuff and do that and learn those new skills and put that stuff into practice, but then it's another to put it up on the website and put it live, or to email it to some journalists without getting a second opinion, so I think that's a really smart option to have in there. It's like the like the final approval before it goes live.
It doesn't have to be me. Like, there's so many other copywriters or editors or
Yeah.
proofreaders, but yeah, I think it's just, people don't know where to turn or what to do. Then there's that option as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really interesting. So I guess like people have, I mean, a lot of architects do have a lot of time at the moment, and I've been kind of preaching about using it a little bit to work on really exactly some of these things. And you were sort of saying to me that it's probably with all the change that's going on, it's probably not a great time to necessarily be launching something like this. But I was saying like I completely disagree, because I think now's the time that way more people are going to be working on this stuff, right? Like,
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I agree. I think now if projects are going to be put on hold, kind of in that wait and see mode, like what's happening. I
yeah,
mean, like you want to kind of come out of this whole thing with having done something at least to move
yeah,
your practice forward. And whether it's this or something else, getting your images, in order or something, just something, I guess, because then it's,
yeah, yeah, definitely. Like something, well, I mean, something that you've probably been putting off for a really long time, and now you don't really have, you're not too busy now for a lot of different firms. So that convenient excuse of being too busy a lot of the time is kind of not really there as much anymore. But it is there for some. It is there for some firms. Not some firms, some architects, some directors who are managing a lot of stuff at home and everything like that. But it might even be a good time to even be thinking about some of these things like we spoke about, like just even the I don't know, the psychic benefit of like kind of particularly working on stuff like the about page, particularly thinking of like, cool, now I have these amazing press outreach skills. I better do some press worthy stuff
Yeah.
with this time. What can I do? Right. And you've given them different suggestions and ideas and things like that. So it's really, really cool. In terms of modules or packages that you're thinking about creating in the future, is there any like sort of sneak preview of, ideas that might be in the pipeline if you were to make more of these in the next, period of time?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm always wanting to only add value. So if there's anyone out there who wants to tell me what I should be making, please feel free. But some ideas that just going around my head at the moment is I want to do a bit like a whole website starter kit, maybe for firms who are just starting out or they just need to start from scratch. So ideas for your homepage, for your services page,
Yeah.
contact page, that contact page that gets forgotten, like that's also
Mm,
important. So things like that. So website one, newsletter content ideas, maybe. I'm a big
mm,
fan of email marketing,
yep.
which is different from newsletters, but I just kind of hope that one day architects will get on board with email marketing a little bit more.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so
Yeah. So
maybe
it's,
Dave, we can collaborate and do a social media one of some sort. Who knows?
I
If
mean,
you're
who knows, right? Like,
you're up for it.
there's no captions on TikTok, so we don't need it anymore. Writing's done. Writing's done for.
Don't say that.
So maybe we could start developing like a TikTok bundle or something, and we could start like, or like how to kill it on House Party, um, and and then we'll be good. But yeah, no, I think that'll be really interesting. I think once you start getting into social media as well, that's where you've got like tons of different spots. And you were saying even like LinkedIn maybe as
Oh
well.
yeah, yeah, LinkedIn profile. I know a few like commercial architects and that who are starting to get quite active, but they've got, their profiles could be, I guess, optimized a little bit better. So that's another platform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you, just like kind of one last question, like how professional do you think architects need to be in this day and age in terms of how they sound?
Look, I mean, I'm a big, I guess, I think advocate of it's not about professionalism so much as it's about
Mm,
personality. And I
mm,
think architects almost think that personality and professionalism are two mutually exclusive things, but you
mm,
can have both. I mean, like Flax Studio, I think they've just updated their website or
mm.
recently, but their old one was full of like there are so many really great websites that are full of personality and they're so professional. So
Wait,
yeah.
are you saying that Flax Studios website was very personable and now it's not?
Have you seen it? No,
I'm
like
looking at it. I'm looking at it right now.
did you see their old one was awesome? I mean, this is from a copywriter's perspective, so it's
Yeah. Wait.
really
What did
different
what
direction.
what sort of stood out to you about the old one?
So they had, for example, like these sliding, um, like I guess images, and one
Yeah.
of them was like, like this is how you flackify. So they made like flack into a verb, which
Yeah.
a word nerd like me was like, it's just brilliant because no other competition can even try and
Yeah.
replicate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they had, every day you don't pay a bill, these boys go unfed, and it had two pictures of their studio dogs, and like just really, it was like puns, and it was
Yeah.
just really like you couldn't take your eyes away, and you
Yeah.
kept reading, and um,
Yeah.
yeah, it was just one example of many.
Yeah. Then they sort of like, it's okay. I don't think David Flack's in my LinkedIn network, so
Yeah,
it's okay. But
I'm gonna get like
cease and
more hate
desist.
mail.
Yeah, yeah, more hate mail from LinkedIn. Yeah, but no, I understand exactly what you're saying. Like a brand that kind of had its own like unique kind of. I mean, again, we're sort of saying like not everything has to always be like quirky. I mean, that's kind of more of like a quirky fun thing. But like that made sense for their brand, and then they tried to put on their more like serious pants, and it's like kind of not as not as interesting, really.
Like Crone Architects, that's a really
Mm,
good example of one that isn't quirky, but the way they write their website, they're a big commercial firm.
mm,
So, but again, it's human. It's just they speak to you like you're a person rather than like,
mm.
a faceless kind of
Yeah, well, I mean, so many like small practices and directors tell me that like, when somebody actually comes to our office and meets us, it's like 90% conversion rate to projects. Like we get along like a house on fire usually,
Yeah,
and they're super excited to work with us. But then they don't find that their like website or any of their media coverage or anything, or even their Instagram account has that same impact on anybody. So there's some sort of like secret magic that's going on in terms of what happens at their office, but when they go out there and like communicate and talk about themselves or describe themselves on their website, like a lot of that just gets lost. And that's always such a shame when you know that if somebody lets their personality out a little bit more, that their ideal client would be absolutely falling in love with it.
exactly.
Where does that pressure to like kind of conform in terms of website copy like come from, do you reckon?
Think it's quite innate in the industry. It's like very inherent in the industry. I think, as I think you mentioned before, like it's like you're doing it for other architects. You're not doing it, and you don't want to be the one that's kind of pushing the boundaries. You kind of want to stay within the confinements. And I think it is, as you said before, like it's like trying it on for size, like just making small changes. Like you don't have to do
Mm.
something radical. You can just, maybe lighten up the tone of your words or make your images a little bit more fun, or, like just small changes can make a big difference. And the biggest thing is, yeah, you do have to stay true to yourself, because if someone's going to Google you and see this like really weird and quirky website, and then they come and meet you in person and you're
Yeah,
like
yeah, right.
introverted, shy, like can't look them in the eyes. They're just like, what? Like there's a disconnect. So it's
Yeah,
all
yeah, and you do see that sometimes as well.
you do, yeah. So
Like,
it,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it's consistency, like I was about all the brand touch points. It's how you write your emails, it's how you answer the phone, it's, as you
Mm,
said, the studio space, like all these things have to work together.
mm, love
So
it. Before we wrap things up, Nikita, do you want to give people directions on how they can get themselves a copy or some copies of your workshop stuff?
yeah, sure. So just head on to my site, which is nikitamorell.com, and then you'll see, yeah, the shop
Mm-hmm.
um, up on the navigation bar. It's called the Architect's Word Shop. You can Google that
Yep.
too. But yeah,
nikitamorell.com/shop.
yes, that's me.
And yeah, it's no, some very awesome stuff. I just wish I could see inside a little bit more.
I'm going to. I'll send you one, and then you
Is there any
can.
way that you can put like some sort of like? Is there any way that you can? Well, I guess like when you go on the pages, like when you click through to look at the pages of each of the individual blueprint side and stuff like
And
that.
I've given you a few preview pages as well, so you can kind of
There's
see
some
what they
preview
look like
pages.
and
They're
feel like.
good-looking pages. Who designed these?
So she's an amazing graphic designer called Michelle Burns. So she used to work with me
Yeah,
in Design magazine. So she's very good.
killed it.
Um,
Absolutely killed it. Well, sounds awesome, Nikita. Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing more about them. And yeah, thank you for coming on the LinkedIn Live.